love to encourage you all to place into the chat some of your favorite parts of the conference. I would love to see those, and we can talk about those a little later. I am Genevieve Jones-Wright. I've been serving as the mistress of ceremonies, or should I say MC in this case stands for mistress of the conference. And I want to welcome everyone to our first plenary session. So what we have confirmed through this conference is that the work cannot be done in silos. And I'm sure you all agree. What we are fighting against in San Diego, where I am, is what the communities are fighting against in Los Angeles, in San Jose, in New York, in New Jersey, in Milwaukee, and even Alberta, Canada. That's what I learned in this conference. And for this reason, we must come together to combat the targeting of our communities, from the criminalization of poor people to the strategic targeting of communities of color through gang injunctions and gentrification, and the practice of under-resourcing and underserving communities of color. And we know that this is all a part of a plan to displace and extract. This is a plan that is part of coordinated efforts on the part of many local, state, and federal government systems and agencies. So another thing that we've confirmed through this conference is that we must continue the work together, and we have to fight together. And because we know what's best for us as impacted people, we must be at the table making decisions about our communities. So with that, I am giving the floor to Mr. Alex Vitale, who will lead our first plenary session, Building a National Network. Let me just tell you a little bit about Alex before he gets on the floor. In an interview that I saw of Mr. Vitale, he was asked if he could give the audience his point of view about what police should be. And he answered that it is not about what the police should be, but what we should be doing instead of policing. Alex Vitale is an author and professor of sociology at Brooklyn College. He's also the coordinator of the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Nation, The Appeal, USA Today, Vice News, and other media outlets. And now he is here with us on this morning, and we're very grateful for that. So without further ado, I'm gonna give the microphone, the stage, the floor, all of those things to Mr. Alex Vitale. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Genevieve. Appreciate it. I'm not sure such elaborate introductions are required in this grouping, but I'm very happy to be here with everyone this morning on the West Coast, this afternoon here on the East Coast. So I have not, and I don't think anyone else has come in with a specific agenda for this conversation, but I will give a little bit of historical background about where I think we're at, and then offer people a chance to add to that. We'll do some introductions, et cetera. So this is not the first gathering of this kind to happen in recent years. We hosted a very similar kind of gathering about 5 years ago, and a smaller gathering about 3 years ago here in New York. So that's how some of us on this call met each other the first time, was at these gatherings in New York. And the goal of those gatherings was to begin to build the feeling that there was a national movement and that there was better coordination. So in New York, we've always looked carefully at work that was being done in Chicago and California around gang databases, around resistance to conspiracy cases, and also just the overall attempt to reframe the conversation away from better policing to alternatives to policing, and how to, dismantle an ever expanding criminal legal approach to the problems that young people and communities face. And of course, we're experiencing a resurgence of this criminalization mindset, a backlash against the victories that were won both practically and rhetorically last summer. So in practice, there has been a fair amount of informal information sharing between folks in different cities. And I think there's been a fair amount of people reading each other's reports and checking in from time to time. But there has not been any kind of coordinated national strategy or even a formal way for people to regularly check in, compare notes, talk strategy, share best practices, etc. And so part of the hope in bringing this together was to see whether or not there is interest, capacity, whether there is sufficient utility in such a gathering, et cetera. A couple more things. One is I'll just say that, there are various forms of national networks working on the issues of over-policing. So obviously the Movement for Black Lives has been doing a lot of that work in a lot of cities. Now they're focused on a broad range of policing issues. Also, Black Lives Matter, which is overlapping but slightly similar, has a grassroots base in a number of different cities. Judy and Joya just gave a presentation about the national network that we've put together to push back against federal task forces. In some cases, these networks have been involved in raising funds, providing technical assistance, coordinating strategy, media, et cetera. So now the question is, is there a need or desire or ability to do something along those lines here? Okay, so I think it would be useful. I think we're a small enough group that we could do this, that we could ask people to go around and introduce themselves. I think it might be helpful if I'll just call on people as I see them on my list, and people let me know if I miss someone. And what I'm interested in these introductions, if possible, is if people could say something about their affiliations, obviously where they are, and any thoughts they have just initially about the desirability and capacity to put some kind of formation together here, and then maybe we can talk about specifics. So I'm just gonna go right at the top here. I think I'm in alpha order. What I see here is Allison Santana. There are no tildes in Zoom, so excuse me if I didn't get that quite right. Is Allison able to join? There we go.
Yeah. Hi, sorry, I didn't quite hear your question.
So the question is, if you could tell us a little bit like where you are, if you have an organizational affiliation, and then if you have any already existing ideas about the utility and form of some kind of national network.
I don't have an affiliation. I heard about this through Professor Alexander. And I decided to join because I want to become more educated, particularly about gang affiliated members and how more accessibility to education can be created. As someone that just left or graduated from UCSD, I noticed that as a student, it became less accessible for members of my community. So that was something that really drew me to join and learn about this. From what I can see and an idea that I have for perhaps creating a more accessible movement and national movement, I feel like young people have to become more active in their reach out, not just to other members of the institution, but to our families and our neighbors. I noticed that as a student, I would share my ideals, but it was mostly with other students that were aware about these issues. I didn't necessarily share with my neighbors or my family because of that, having to commute and do all that. But during the pandemic, as I had more time to be at home and had more time to be in my community, it became more clear to me that we have to reach within our communities in order to create a network, because education, like I personally feel like I had access to education, but then there was a part of me that also forgot to share that education and make it more accessible to those that didn't have time to indulge in theory.
Yeah,
Like I did.
so Allison, if I could just stop you, this is not quite the time for a whole analysis. Just really wanted this very brief idea of like institutional affiliation and specific plans for a national network. So Allison raises presentation though does raise an issue, which is whether or not such a network would be limited to organizations or whether it would be possible for individuals who are not affiliated to be involved. So my first thought to you, Allison, is you need to join an organization that's actually doing work, right? That's the way to most effectively contribute. But let me just, and then Allison, there'll be a chance to come back and talk about some of those issues later, I think. So just going alphabetically, Andrea St. Julian, one of our lovely co-hosts.
Yes. And thank you, Allison. I really, really appreciated hearing your thoughts. Um, well, I'm going to feel like I'm a ringer because, I conceived this conference about 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm a convener of the conference. I'm affiliated with far too many organizations to name here, but I will name one, San Diegans for Justice. I, of course, believe that we need a national network. That is why that was, again, how and why I conceived this conference and why I've worked for the last 10 months to make sure it came to pass. I think, though, that it should be open to both organizations and individuals. I think it's so important to do that because if there's one thing that keeps us from moving forward, it is that we are not as organized as we should be. Organized power is realized power. So those are my thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. Ashley? All right, while we're waiting for Ashley, I'll maybe ask Babe to check in.
Hi, I'm Babe Howell. I am affiliated with the Gangs Coalition here in New York, the grassroots advocates for neighborhood groups. And I think in the name is our idea that we do have to get away from the idea that really pathologizes gangs. Like gangs are naturally occurring groups that could be a location for really political involvement, for social involvement, for building and developing neighborhoods and making them stronger. And I think it's very deliberate effort to tear down those naturally occurring associations. So, one really important part of this national coalition is to change that conversation. Of course, we don't want violent crime, but that is not the same thing as gangs, and I'll stop there. Thanks, Alex.
Did we get Ashley back? Maybe Ashley is a passive listener to the conversation. Cheryl? All right, well, we're waiting. Let's see if Cheryl wants to contribute. Oh, here she comes.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Swing Jones. I'm here in San Diego. I am probably the only district attorney on the call, but I am a community partnership prosecutor. So in that role, I spend time not in the courtroom, but in the community, working to stop crime before it happens, working to disrupt the school to prison pipeline, there's a lot of conversation here in San Diego about gangs and gang enhancements and why they are so damaging to the community. So I really just joined the conversation today to get a better idea of the views that go behind why gang enhancements are so detrimental. So, but I am, having been on the prosecution side for 22 years, prosecuting everything from misdemeanors to murders, I'm really now on the side trying to understand why crime happens and what role the DA can play. I know we're kind of thought of as the bad guys in this whole process, but what active role we can play to actually join forces with you guys. So
Thank you, Cheryl. Colleen?
I don't want to skip Chris because he's alphabetically before me.
Well, go ahead and I will figure out. I don't even see a Chris on my
I
list.
see a Chris Mitchell, I see.
Oh, he's at the
My name
bottom
is
of my
Colleen
list.
Cusack.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Colleen. So,
My name is Colleen Cusack and I'm from San Diego. I've been a criminal defense attorney for 29 years. I am affiliated with a lot of organizations, but I very much consider myself an individual force. So I do what I need to do, but then I can tap into those organizational affiliations to support me in what I'm doing. So I encourage Ashley to be an individual and not feel like she has to hide in an organization, but use organizations as our weapons, as our armor kind of thing, because every organization is made up of individuals. I see the movement moving forward because I'm a group of another organization here in San Diego that is an affiliation of organizations. And our strength would be in being able to come together a few times a year, like maybe seasonally, 4 times in a Zoom, and to make good use of that time because we are all very busy individuals. But to be able to support what each of us is doing, spread awareness of what each of us is doing so that we can take that to our individual communities and apply the good stuff. And be able to mobilize on social media at a heartbeat to be able to say, okay, everybody go attack this right now, and have the numbers behind us that we can make a showing on Twitter, on Instagram. Facebook's evil, so I'm giving up on Facebook. And so that's my vision for coming together. And I very, very much want, I depend on the organizational affiliations I'm with to help refuel me, to help remind me of why I'm doing what I'm doing and keep me focused. So I very much would like a national one to do the same. Thank you.
great. Dan?
Hi, Dan Jones from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I think, like Cheryl, I'm maybe the only police officer on this call. I'm a police officer. I've been a police officer for 24 years. I'm also a researcher where my research is looking at the victim offender overlap and understanding the justice client better, understanding the vast majority of criminality is symptomatic of trauma or survival crime. And in order for our communities to feel safe with the police, if the police are still around, it has to be around compassionate policing and understanding of who people are and moving towards the goal of reduction in crime severity and the reduction of incarceration. Far too often, police officers and police systems measure success based on arrest rates and sentencing, and that's the wrong way to do things. So I've spent a long time in this space. I was a correctional officer for 3 years as well, and I have had to unlearn a lot of things. It was interesting today, someone talked about broken windows theory and how that was something that our organization did for a while, and realizing that all we did was overcriminalize certain populations. So I think it needs to be more than just a national coalition. I think it needs to be at least a North American coalition. People oftentimes look at Canada as the nice country, but I can tell you that we've had a 56% increase in incarceration of Indigenous people over the last 10 years. And you are 10 times more likely to be incarcerated if you're Indigenous than in this country if you are non-Indigenous. So I think we need to have the conversation broader than the United States. And that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Desiree? While we're waiting for Desiree, we could try Devin.
Yes, hello. My name is Devin Jones. I currently live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm a senior at Aquinas College and an intern at Mercantile Bank. I'm interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and my specific reason for being here on this call today is to kind of learn more about the different ways I can positively impact my communities over here. So I don't remember who specifically, but somebody mentioned earlier just taking the good stuff from conferences like these and going back to my neighborhoods and, trying to contribute positively. I don't really have any ideas in regards to establishing a national network that is as powerful as we are trying to establish, but I am interested in being a part of it once it is established. So that's kind of why I'm sitting in here and just learning as much as I can today.
Thank you, Devin. Did Desiree, is Desiree interested in checking in? If not, I think we've just been joined by Diane Kim. If you want to introduce yourself and maybe say anything about thoughts you've had about establishing a national network.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diane Kim. I am a resident of San Diego. I also work for Community Advocates for Just and Moral Governance. And I just joined. I heard someone who was just sharing about like really listening and learning. And that's definitely where I think that I'm at. I want to take the lead of the folks that have already been doing this work. And I want to know how I can amplify and participate in that. So I'm going to leave it to the experts on this one.
Thank you, Diane. Felicity?
Sorry. Thank you, Alex, fellow Hampshire grad. So hello to everyone in Springfield, Massachusetts also. So I'm here in Irvine, California, which is in Orange County, and have been working with a number of different organizations. One is the Orange County Rapid Response Network. We respond with trying to empower community members that have been affected by ICE, either themselves personally or their family members who could be in immigration detention. And with that organization, and also a recent organization called the People's Budget Orange County, which is kind of mirrors what the People's Budget in LA has been doing. We're trying to work on delegitimizing the Orange County Sheriff, who is terrible. And one of the things that we're working on a statewide level is the passage of AB 937, which is the Vision Act, which would outlaw all ICE transfers between local police and the California Department of Incarceration and any federal immigration forces. Also working kind of tangentially with the NAACP here in Orange County, but they aren't really, they're working more on integration of faculties in local schools. There is a small part that is working on issues of people of color who've been unjustly arrested and held on bail, primarily in some of the Black Lives Matter rallies that we have had here in Orange County. So that's about it.
Thank you. Francisco?
Yes, thank you. Francisco Romero here with Unión del Barrio, Chiques Community Coalition out of Oxnard and Los Angeles. Really, we came on here to learn from each other around ways that we could tackle broad criminalization strategies such as the civil gang injunctions. We worked on that process of dismantling the breadth and the scope of these for the last 20 years. And we see a turning, sounds like there's a turn we've made collectively through a lot of the reform measures that are happening with a lot of the budgeting. I think Felicity just mentioned, here in Los Angeles, there was a big coalition of forces that really talked about this thing called Measure J, kind of diverting and disinvesting / reinvesting into approaches that are about the social the power of the social being of community versus the traditional criminalization, militarization strategies. We believe that until that happens, until there is a equilibrium around the question of resource distribution, that it'll be very tough to deal with the questions that we're talking about today. So we're all about that. We're here, we're learning. We also believe in collectivism and dialogue and debate, and so we're open to that as well. And so just excited to be here. I want to thank you to Sean and Garcia Leyes and all those folks that invited us to be part of the conversation.
Welcome, Francisco. Gabby?
Yes, hello. I presented just earlier on gang injunctions, and I am part of an organization here in Orange County, California, Chicanos Unidos, and we primarily focus efforts in Santa Ana, but get involved in anything that's criminalizing the community. Most of my efforts have been working on dismantling gang injunctions for the last 10 years here and in Santa Barbara. And then we also focus on issues on gentrification and how they're all connected. And then also push for changes in the political climate here.
Great, thank you. Any thoughts about national networking?
We would definitely be interested.
Okay, that's useful to know. Janine Grigsby?
Hi, my name's Janine Grigsby. I work actually for Alameda County Probation Department. I'm an attorney, but my job there is in the reentry and outreach unit. So I work with providing services to people who are on probation based on the AB 109 funding, and really coordinating all the services that are available from CBOs within the community. So I definitely think national network is important. You can't do any kind of systems dismantling without the whole nation being involved or engaged in that process. So I think it's important, and individuals, I think, should at least be able to have a place at the table, even if they're not normally engaged. If you have any kind of convening, I think it's really important to have those voices there to be heard too.
Thank you. Judy?
Hey, I'm Judy Green. I am active in the New York City Gangs Coalition with Alex and Babe and a bunch of other folks that have been involved in the conference all 3 days. I come to that work after many, many years of concern about policing and the criminal legal system and all of its problems in general, with an awareness that that gang enforcement has really been a federal project, a federal tool to criminalize, profile, arrest, and incarcerate young Black and brown people since way before Bill Barr established violent gang safe street task forces, so-called federal task forces in every FBI office going back to 1992, the first time that he was the Attorney General. So I just finished a workshop looking at what Bill Barr did during the Trump administration involving setting up task forces yet again, the infamous Operation Relentless Pursuit. Work with Alex in a network of folks in local cities that he targeted for that effort. And a lot of that effort was advertised as being, gang interventions, your basic counterinsurgency operations directed by the federal government with lots of money to hire more cops coming from the Department of Justice cops office So I am here to network. I'm very interested in networking, and I'm waiting to see what can grow from this. Thank you all.
Thank you. Kelly?
Is that me from Care Coalition?
Yes, please.
Kelly White from Capital Area Immigrants' Rights Coalition, Washington, D.C. We primarily work with people who are impacted by detention in Virginia and Maryland area, so ICE detention. I'm here because so many people I work with are impacted by gang databases, and so wanting to learn more and wanting to, you know, wanting a need for a national strategy on this, and really wanting to learn from abolitionists as well as folks looking at a staggered or incremental approach. Just thank you for this forum.
You bet. Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Romo. I'm with the California State Public Defender. I'm in Oakland, California. And for the last 30 years, I've done death penalty defense. And through that work, I've been working hard at challenging gang laws that are step law as it's applied in the death penalty context. But our mandate is changing to help improve indigent defense in California generally. So in addition to my gang work, I'm now doing a lot of with the Racial Justice Act. And, you know, I mean, to say a silo is an understatement. I've been so siloed for so long. I am so excited to be out of the silo. And I think, as I've said before, and as I'm learning at this conference, the most important thing in our work is to change the narrative. And I think it will take a national coalition to do that. I mean, Californians like to think of themselves as kind of a breed apart. And so I've never really thought, you know, about how important national contacts are. But in the last year or so, I've been making them, and I realized that yeah, we need to work together. So I think it's a great idea.
Great. Mono?
Hi, thank you. My name is Mano Raju. I'm the San Francisco Public Defender. Good to see everyone. I, haven't been able to attend as much of the conference as I wanted to, although I did pop in yesterday for a bit, came into a chat room this morning, had a great conversation with one of the organizers, and caught the last one. So I'm not sure what the call to the question is, but I think it's something about what are we looking forward to?
Well, in terms of thoughts that you have about a national network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think it's hugely important seeing, that we have academics, practicing defenders, community organizers, and community-based organizations on this call. I think that's the direction we need to move in. One thing that has been helpful to me in my own practice personally is actually calling in community experts into the courtroom to contradict the gang task force experts. And I found jurors have been extremely receptive to those experts, and also really breaking down the jury instructions as opposed to being intimidated by them. Because when you actually look at the instructions, it's actually a lot harder to convict someone of, at least in California, if you really get in there. But I find too many of us are sort of intimidated by the overwhelming evidence, and frankly end up pleading our clients earlier than we should. And I think we can actually have success if we organize along with the community and do some deeper training in this area. But I also think this is a national issue, and we need to start having those conversations, start doing the community education, start doing the collective brainstorming with this wide network. And I'm eager to start that process, because I think some people get, caught up in one, like maybe legislative reform, and we really have to have much larger conversations. And I think we have to really think about what's our North Star, what's our 2-year plan, what's our 5-year plan, even if we can't, let's at least envision what that would be, so that if we're working on something, we put it in the proper context. But I'm very excited about these possibilities. I want to thank Andrea, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and all the other organizers for pulling this together. And I'm really looking forward to being aware of it earlier and making more of a contribution next time. So thank you.
Great. Thank
for
you,
this.
Manal. Next, Matt.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Soto Rosen. I'm a public defender in San Francisco. I work with Minot. I've been a public defender for almost 23 years now, and most of it in San Francisco. And to kind of to echo Lisa's comments, San Francisco thinks of itself as a very progressive place, but we know that that's not really the case when it comes to our clients and people of color in San Francisco, which are increasingly a minority. So it's really, really helpful. I've learned so much listening to everyone these past 2 days to get new, fresh ideas. And that's what we need. And that's why I'm really looking forward to working with everyone. And we're constantly using, as Minot said, community experts. I saw some people give a great presentation. I think it was Friday that I'm going to now contact to see if they're willing to be experts on Latinx issues, Lucero and Alex. And also just, even though San Francisco and California thinks of itself as such a trailblazing state, they're also trailblazing in bad ways with the introduction of all these gang statutes, the STEP Act, the 3 strikes law. They trailblazed, the California legislature trailblazed those too. So let's not forget that. And we're constantly having to bring in, hey, look what the New Jersey Supreme Court did in this context, Your Honor, just to kind of get people to start thinking about new and fresh ideas. So I really welcome this national and dialogue, and thank you guys so much for putting this together.
Great. One theme I'm hearing is there's both the need for people in certain practice areas to have communication in different venues, but also how people in the different practice areas need to be talking to each other. So the folks doing work on the streets, folks doing work in the courtroom, folks doing work in the classroom need to be better coordinated as well. Great, thank you. Professor Shabazz.
Yes, thank you. I've put my contact in the chat. I'm president of the National Council for Black Studies and professor out here in Western Mass at the University of Massachusetts. I also put in the chat a link to a story last month from the Springfield Republican about that shows a kind of deepening investment with the district attorney's office and law enforcement here in Western Mass in terms of looking at areas like Knox Street in Springfield as being under the control of a posse and therefore subject to these kinds of intense tactics. What's going on in the law and how things are in the state, or maybe moving in the state, I'm not sure of, but I'm very much interested in seeing the development of a network. I was in a session yesterday from a woman who I identified as gang affiliated and from San Diego. She went to City College, did a master's thesis on gang affiliated students who had gone to college and were what their experiences were in higher ed. And what most struck me in her presentation was what it seemed like a lack of an academic network to provide any kind of mentoring or support for her as she attempted to do really important cutting edge kind of research. She got a lot of pushback from the Institutional Review Board in the name of trying to protect her, the sources she was interviewing. She got a lot of pushback from other professors calling for her to soften her language and her approach. So it really strikes me that whatever network is created, aside from those working in legal areas, policy areas, if there might also be a network included in that for academics, for scholars to talk about how do we better support individuals like Gabrielle and others who attempt to navigate institutions of higher ed to further to invest in themselves and be able to help their community better.
Great, thank you. Rachel?
Hi, my name is Rachel Johnson. I'm attending this conference as an intern with Community Advocates for Just and Moral Governance in San Diego and finishing my bachelor's in criminal justice at San Diego State University. However, I live in Oregon. My work going forward is going to try to bring these types of resources to smaller communities in Oregon. The big cities, Portland, Eugene, there's a lot of activism, there's a lot of groups. Just in the last few months, I've been trying to find organizations to work with locally, and there are none. A national network would be so beneficial because these smaller communities are not devoid of these issues whatsoever. But a lot of the work is being done in bigger cities. And I don't want to move to Portland to work there. I want to work in my community and address these issues here. And it would take a lot of support. So I think it would be fantastic, especially in accessibility. If I don't have an organization to join, I would have to work as an individual or create my own. And that's, I would need a lot of support to do that.
Great. Yeah, I think one of the challenges has been that we have a sense of what's going on in LA, San Diego, Oakland, Chicago, New York, but often this gang stuff is happening all over the place, and we're not networked outside those major cities, right? So like hearing about these efforts in Springfield, Mass, is, I think, really important. Sean?
Hi, my name is Sean. I'm the executive director of the Peace and Justice Law Center in Southern California. My work focuses on community safety, recognizing that state violence is often as much a threat as community violence. I believe that a national network is essential in the kind of work we're doing here at this conference of learning from each other. I think I've also found myself working nationally around federal law, particularly around immigration law and seeing deportation as a form of gang suppression. I also hear what people are saying, that there are many places that are not, sort of the fight hasn't gotten there yet. At least our side hasn't shown up yet. And I want to be there. And I just also have this nagging sense that there is something great that I'm failing to imagine that would come of it. And either somebody else has imagined it or we'll find it by pursuing it. But, I know it's there. I just feel it.
You reminded me within the defund movement, there are these learning communities that have been facilitated by Andrea Ritchie and some others through the the Justice Hub. And so they have this network of people that they invite, and they do these targeted learning communities about police unions or about use of force or about, narcotics units or whatever. And so that sparked some potential ideas. Chris? I know Chris introduced himself in the chat as well. He's a self-advocate for the ARC of the USA. I'm not familiar with that group or where it's located, though. I don't know, Chris, if you want to give us some more details about that. Yeah?
Yeah, Chris doesn't have a microphone.
I see that on the thing there. So anyway, if Chris wants to just type in a little bit more in the chat so that we have a sense. Okay, so there's clearly, support for the idea here, but there are many more steps, though, to make that a reality. So there are big issues about capacity to coordinate such activity. I think, there's interest in having it be open to organizations and individuals. There's the question of whether or not it is making decisions in some formal way, or it's just acting as a network, learning communities, sharing of information, resources, ideas, creating spaces for strategic conversations, that sort of thing. There's a question about whether or not it would be open to anyone with any connection to law enforcement. We have 3 people on the call who work for law enforcement. And I know in New York, that's a non-starter for us. We would not be able to be a part of a coalition that had anyone connected to law enforcement, attorneys, probation, police, any of district attorney, yeah, any of that. So that's something we have to think about, because in part what we're doing is developing strategies to directly challenge the practices and strategies of those institutions. So we can't have a fruitful strategic conversation, even if the individuals may be sympathetic. We can't be a part of such conversations with the work that we do. So I'm open to having people pick up some piece of this that we need to talk through. Should we talk about whether or not we were trying to create something that is a formal coalition or something that's more a network? Maybe we could just take that on for a second. Andrea?
Alex? Yeah, I think, you know, oftentimes with these kind of things, you kind of have to start in a particular place and let it develop. You know, it might, you know, to try to organize a rigid coalition right off the bat might be a little too difficult. But starting out with a network and seeing, you know, what that's going to be and how that's going to form might be the easiest way to start. The conference is going to send out a survey sometime today or tomorrow, and we will put it out there if people would like to see decriminalizing neighborhoods turn into a national network and what that might look like. So, you know, we could start there.
I'd like to endorse that approach as well that Andrea is giving, in that as a president of a somewhat small organization, it does bring up a resource question. Who's available to put in the time to keep the network information flowing, to organize things? Andrea just was talking about putting in 10 months to make this conference happen. And so once it raises a resource question, it then raises, you know, how do you develop the resources? Are you going to write a grant? Are you going to, you know, is there a donor, or how, or do you just tax the member organizations or member individuals to support the work of the group? So I think, yes, start kind of organically, scale up as you get more people involved, more investment, more support involved, and then see where it goes from there.
Thank you. Does anyone want to make the counter argument for creating something that is more fixed, has a set membership, is making actual decisions? Okay, so I don't.
Actually, let me jump in I have another counter proposal. Although something more formal, in my mind, requires money to be really. I mean, that's, formalities often are expensive. So I'm not opposed to it if there was a source of money. But my other counter proposal is, I wonder if there are not organizations, national organizations that already exist that share our goals, but we are just not connected to, and that perhaps we could join and they could make space and, you know, make common cause without starting from scratch with something new. But I don't have any organization to suggest off the top of my head.
You know, there are some national like anti-violence groups. Some are more focused on like gun control. Some work closely with police in various capacities. Some, I think, might be more sympathetic to this. But the fact that so far, at least, no one on the call is actually working with any of those people. So, Andrea, do you have some ideas here? No.
I would, yeah. No, I don't know of any either. And always, just to put a little something out there, a little bit of my concern is that we might be swallowed up by a group that is not designed for our central purpose, and that it would be really hard to focus in on and create a pathway for exactly what we all want to do by going through another organization. But I'd be all open to it if there were such an organization that could truly support us.
Does anyone know the Community Justice Action Fund? Yes, Felicity?
I mean, I know them because during the pandemic, I followed all of their webinars and things that they were doing. And they have, I think they only have some connections here in Los Angeles. I know not in Orange County, but their work seems to be primarily about gun violence and with what they were talking about earlier in one of the workshops, credible messengers within different communities in Baltimore, in Philadelphia. They do, it's amazing work that they do. But I think it's just primarily focused on gun violence, not so much on policing per se.
Well, I'm looking at their website and it says one of their main points is police violence is gun violence.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. So I have a relationship with Amber Goodwin, who's based in Houston, who's on their board. And anyway, that's a group that seems like there might be some potential, but it's only just a potential space. My sense, though, from hearing from folks, for now, what we should be trying to do is to create some kind of network to harness some resources that we already have. And then the next thing to talk about would be if we have ideas about how to maybe get some additional resources so that there could be someone whose responsibilities include, maintaining the network, coordinating the network. So not making decisions, or being the executive director of the network, but someone who's keeping the mailing lists updated and facilitating, learning communities and things like that. Does that sound like a direction to start with? Any concerns or counter proposals to that? Still, it's a little vague. So then the question is, so what would some of the tasks be for such a set of responsibilities? So I mentioned, for instance, maybe people could just put stuff in the chat of what they think the actual activities concretely of such a coordinator would be. So I mentioned, for instance, maintaining a contact database.
I'd also ask, is there a commitment to keeping this conference going on an annual or some basis? That would certainly be.
That's a great question. Yeah. What else?
I think we, just kind of the basics. We'd have to have a website, and we could attach to that some kind of a member database where people can contact each other. I would think that website would have resources listed on it under particular topics. We could also start coalescing around particular issues and strategies that we think are most important. And I think, again, the website could be the central hub for that. We would then start thinking about, do we want to have meetings? Do we want to meet once a year, twice a year, quarterly? And again, do we want to continue holding this conference annually or biannually? And I think that if we answered those questions, we'd have and Sean is absolutely right. We have to raise money, right? And figure out how we're going to raise money. I think if we answered all of those questions, we would, or we could do most of those things, we would have a really good network set up. Oh, and then marketing, or not. And when I say marketing, I mean making sure that organizations and individuals know and understand that this network exists.
I put in the chat the defundpolice.org website, which I have some, I think there's some limits to it, but if you scroll down a little bit, there's a map, and next to the map is a group of issue areas. So you could either do a geographic search. Oh, who's in the network in my geographic area? I click on that, and then up comes a list of organizations and individuals, or who's working on gang databases. And then you get a list of everyone who's working on gang databases.
There's also a question in the chat from Lisa for you, Alex. She was just hoping you could share a little bit more about
I was just taking
New York
a
Coalition.
quick note here. So,
okay.
Thank you. So we maintain a website. We're more of a coalition than a network. So we actually make decisions, carry out campaigns, organize demonstrations, develop legislation. So it's not exactly analogous to having a network of information sharing.
But we may want to turn into a coalition.
That absolutely, that's always a possibility. Yeah. So maybe, having practice area groups and learning communities, something like that could be something that would be part of it.
And certainly gathering information on the desire to build a coalition and what issues we want to maybe coalesce around to start working toward creating a coalition.
So how much time do we have left on this call? I think we're running close here. Is that right?
We have about 17 minutes left.
Okay, thank you.
We're going till 12:45. Yep.
Okay, so then the question is, should we get down to brass tacks in terms of responsibilities and stuff, or do the conference organizers want to take this and have a conversation separately to work out more details, or do you want me to keep trying to push something?
Well, I certainly think that the conveners of the conference we will definitely want to speak about how we might be able to facilitate this. It's always bandwidth is the issue. I would definitely ask people, and on this call, to put in the chat if they are interested in being part of a working committee to create this network and potentially this coalition. So please put that information in the chat now. And I will make sure that I will also put a question in the survey that we're going to send out for people to give me information if they or their organization wants to be part of the networking or the coalition, and if they are willing to participate in that. So, and when I say participate, willing to be part of the committee that is really going to get this going and get this started. So how does that sound, Alex?
So we basically, we're going to assume that everyone who's participated in the conference is potentially interested in the existence of a network and being part of it, unless they say otherwise. But what we're looking for right now is people who would help actually bring it to fruition.
Exactly.
Well, certainly you can count me in, and we can talk about, you know, what the Gangs Coalition more broadly, but the Policing and Social Justice Project specifically, you know, is interested in helping with that.
Fantastic. I'd also like to hear more thoughts from other people, though, about this early formation. Because I kind of did a lot of the talking, when I really want to hear what other people want to see in terms of how we form and what that initial formation looks like.
Colleen?
Hi. I think we kind of somewhat formed just in this one little group, in terms of expressing our intention and our desire. I don't know that we would have much power as a coalition until we're more organized. So we need that organization, we need that cohesiveness as a national group in order to coalesce. But that's where I would like to see it going, to give us a national voice on these national issues eventually. And we just need to build and do so. And so I think there is a lot of conscious, deliberative effort that needs to go into setting it up to give us the framework so that we can get to where we need to go eventually.
And if I can because I would also like to throw this out to the group, because Dan just mentioned, yeah, he's interested, but he's law enforcement. So I just want to throw this out that, you know, perhaps, you know, the network and the coalition would not be able to maintain within the organization itself law enforcement, but that if we have some kind of auxiliary committee where law enforcement really believe in our mission can have kind of a separate organization that is connected or at least open with us, that they can dialogue with us. And Colleen is looking like no.
I'm just having, so there is an organization that I'm not going to name that I'm a part of. And the national just sent a thing out saying, if you have any affiliation with the police agency, if you ever work for a police agency, you can't do what you're doing for us anymore unless we approve you. And so in the 80s, for 3 months, I dispatched for the police. And that experience informed my decision. I learned that there were police officers who bragged about their flashlight, knowing their flashlight was 12 stitches wide. They did things that were just complete lawlessness, but they knew they wouldn't be checked. And so those all informed my decision to become a defense attorney, but yet somebody's looking at it from an abstract saying, if you had any experience with them, boom, you're out. I think I would like to move to switch to what Dan Jones was talking about in another presentation, to compassionate policing. And there are police out there that I think are comport with what we envision for the future. As defense attorneys, we accept that people are rehabilitation and redemption, and there are lost souls, so to speak. And so I'd like to take the judgment out of our groups, that we're not judging and affiliating people just because of their affiliation. You know, I present every presentation as if there's a team of police officers and prosecutors watching me, great, maybe they'll learn something, because I'm not saying anything that's super secret that that is gonna.
But Colleen, you're not going to discuss your defense strategy in front of the opposing counsel.
No.
Okay, well, there's a lot of analogy here, right? So yes, anybody who ever knew a police officer is canceled is not what we're talking about here. But we have people on the call who are working prosecutors and working police officers. And so that means we can't have a discussion about strategies to go against prosecutorial practices because they're listening to the call. hearing our strategic conversation about how to oppose their practices. So obviously, a website can be open to the public. We can have conferences that can be open to the public, but we cannot have movement strategy conversations with district attorneys and police in the room.
I have some thoughts about that. Oh, I'll let baby, she rose her hand.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I think you got to assume they're in the room, not the ones that would want to be there and are working with you, but they'll always infiltrate. At the same time, because so many people are so often criminalized, having active police and active prosecutors may not work. Like, you want to at least say, in theory, that's not what's going on here. I do think a collaboration and a wing might make sense. There's going to be no advocate who's more persuasive than the cop who says, this is bad policing, this is racist policing, than the prosecutor who says, I can't sleep at night because I collaborated in these takedowns and people went to prison because of their associations and First Amendment rights. So, you know, I think there's a world in which, A, we have to assume that the ones that don't mean us well are in the room, and B, we do have to think about a constructive collaboration, because I think they could be really useful allies, and they can reform.
May I make a comment?
Please, Dan.
So for me, and I totally understand the reticence of having active police officers. I do understand it. But I also understand, you know, working with people who use drugs and the whole concept of nothing to us without us. And I see that similarly in policing, because, and believe me, I have beat my head against a wall for a lot of years now. And I run into all kinds of different roadblocks, and sometimes at the peril of my own career, being as vocal as I've been about how we do things. And I often say it's not what the police do, it's how we do it. And how we do it is often marginalizing people, continuously over-criminalizing neighborhoods, impacting people of color and Indigenous people in a way that is offensive. And I get that. At the same time, it becomes really easy to dismiss anything that is said by a coalition that has no policing connection. And that dismissiveness creates a divisiveness, which creates a us versus them mentality. And I truly believe that in order for us to make actual change, we need to be close. We need to have that connection with each other, because that builds relationships and that builds change. If we are distant from each other, we continuously build that divisiveness, us versus them mentality. And believe me, like I said, I have been a very loud voice in policing. A previous police chief wanted to fire me because I said police are losing community support in 2017. And I actually said within the next 3 to 5 years, there's going to be a matchbox events that change policing in North America forever. And unfortunately, almost predictive of the murder of George Floyd. So I think we're at a time now, way better than any other time in history, based on the amount of people that have paid attention to what is police reform, but I think needs to be evolution. Because I've heard the same argument since 1991 with Rodney King, and I'm tired of the same old reform arguments. But I think if we have a group of people who have a vision and a path and don't always agree, and I'm good with that, we can disagree on that path, on that journey. But at the same time, we need to really focus on community safety and well-being, and we need to focus on people. And we need to focus on how policing needs to be done in the future. And to me, if policing needs to be done at all in the future, and if it doesn't, what is the alternative to that? What is the alternative to that? Because unfortunately, we are human beings, and let's be honest, the human race is nasty at times, and we hurt each other. And how do we stop? What do we do to address that? If it's imagining something beyond our current system, which I totally and truly believe we need to, because when we look at the history of policing, both in Canada with the March West and the oppression of Indigenous populations, the US more in relation to slavery, but both of them are built in systemic racist issues that we need to address in order to move forward. So I'm a little bit passionate about it because I've been in a system that I don't agree with. and I said in my previous presentation, some of my closest friends are people that I've incarcerated. And that to me is those individuals have motivated my change. And, you know, I heard in the previous thing that police become academics to prove they're right. Not always. Police sometimes become academics to prove the system wrong. And it's about how do we fix it? So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Dan. I mean, this raises a more general issue, which is that usually networks need some kind of guiding principles. So in New York, again, we're a coalition rather than a network. Ours are pretty tight, and we approve people for membership. And those folks have to agree that they embrace the sort of core principles that guide our organizing. So I would think that an early task of such an initiative would be to establish basic ground rules, which might include how we want to relate to those in law enforcement, in the criminal legal system, right? So that's not a decision we're going to make here, but that is a decision that would need to be made, I think.
Yes, and can I just add that that is going to be some of the most important, hardest work, and will take the most time and needs the most input. But count me in.
Yeah, Andrea?
I would say I agree, even though I think we can, I really do think we can have the best of both worlds. We can have some kind of an auxiliary thing with law enforcement that has nothing to do with our strategizing and has nothing to do with, you know, the core. I mean, doesn't inappropriately impinge on the core of what we're doing, yet has all the benefits that Dan talked about, because I really do believe in those in the benefits that he talked about and that Colleen talked about. I think we can easily do both. But that's a discussion for the committee.
All right, so given the time, I think the next step is going to come from the conference organizers, who have received some requests to join them in the conversation. And we've laid out some sense of the scope of the thing, the general organizational structure, right? And then the need for some next steps, which I think is actually kind of exceeds my expectations for today. So, because there's only so much you can do in an hour and 15 minutes. So I want to thank everyone for being so responsible and for contributing so honestly and generously to such an important conversation. And I wish everyone all the best in trying to figure out